Ben Riggs presents D&D Out Loud, Episode 104, Star Wars Saga Edition Reunion.
Welcome once again, assembled internet hordes, to D&D Out Loud with Ben Riggs. I am Ben Riggs, D&D historian and author of Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons & Dragons. And over the past 13 years of writing and podcasting, I have met hundreds of creative geniuses in and around the world of tabletop role-playing games. Here on this show, I have asked 3 of these flaming torches of the human imagination to come on and have a fascinating discussion, and with them as well as my buddy Brent, who's also great. He's great in his own way.
Thanks for making me feel welcome, Ben.
Yeah.
But the game designers who are here are 3 of the most brilliant and prolific designers of our time. First up is Owen KC Stephens. Owen has more ENnies than I can count and was part of the design team for Starfinder First Edition and, of course, Star Wars Saga Edition, which is what the purpose is of this conversation today. He's the owner and publisher of Rogue Genius Games. Welcome, Owen.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to be here.
Next up is Rodney Thompson. Rodney worked on the 4th edition Dark Sun campaign setting and, of course, Saga Edition. He was also involved in the creation of 5th edition. This is the second time I'm mentioning Saga Edition in these notes. I don't need to say that twice. Also, Dusk City Outlaws.
Mm-hmm.
That was what I forgot to put in the notes. And also the lead designer of Dusk City Outlaws. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thirdly, we have one of the most nerd famous people that I know, Chris Perkins. Chris's career stretches back to Dungeon Magazine at TSR and goes all the way up to the release of the 5.5th rules for D&D in 2024. In a career so long and varied, it's hard to pick out highlights, but I would point to CURSE of STRAHD, which is an excellent expansion and translation of RAVENLOFT into 5th edition. And of course, he is also one of the co-designers of Star Wars Saga Edition. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Lastly, and I do promise not least, we have my buddy Brent.
In this company, I would accept least, and I wouldn't quibble about it at all.
So Brent is here because within my local gaming group, he ran a legendary Saga Edition Star Wars campaign. Many of them said it's the best campaign they'd ever participated in their entire gaming lives. The concept of the campaign was, what if a small cadre of fledgling Jedi got mixed up in the early days of the Rebel Alliance and changed the course of events in the galaxy? And if I recall right, you just started at New Hope and kind of used the movies. No, you're shaking your head. Okay, you tell me about the campaign.
Before A New Hope, the events of A New Hope took place about a third of the way through the 2-year campaign, 2 years of real world time here. So the PCs were established, and introducing A New Hope as an adventure that they went through was a tremendous amount of fun, in part because I got to watch the players pick up on what was happening one by one as light bulbs went off over their heads. It was a great time.
Well, thank you all for being here. Brent, thank you for being here as well. I appreciate it because I read Saga Edition 20 years ago, and I played an amazing Saga Edition game at Gen Con one year, but by no means was it ever my main jam, even though I love Star Wars and love D&D. So that said, again, if you've never heard this podcast before, it's kind of like a conversation podcast. And I brought Brent on here to be our conversation starter. But as time goes on, I'm going to step back. I'd imagine he'll probably back, and we'll just let our designers percolate.
Pages of questions.
Oh my gosh. I heard Ben say 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not to dwell on that, I think.
Be prepared for we don't remember a lot.
Yeah. Just be happy that we're still alive.
Yeah.
All right, then I'm going to pass the torch to Brent here and say, what do you want to ask these guys?
I'd like to start, if you don't mind, gentlemen, when you were designing this marvel of a game, this absolute gem, did you each have areas of focus or responsibility within the design work that you remember? What What were you focused on when you were building this thing?
Well, I was a full-time employee at Wizards. We had the license to do a new version of the Star Wars game. However, almost all of the team's resources were at that time dedicated to 4th edition. So there was a lot of work being done, and it was early in 4th edition's conception. So tons of people were off in other rooms hammering out what 4th edition would be. And I was just kind of sitting in a corner desk by myself going, and looking at the occasional document that they were firing over the wall. I guess my job was to see if there was a way to take some of the learnings from that game in development and apply them to Star Wars whilst keeping the Star Wars feel alive. And then my other responsibility was finding some people outside the building, because there was nobody inside the building to work with, to actually help execute.
Yeah, at the time this hit, I didn't work on staff at Wizards anymore, and Rodney did not work on staff at Wizards yet. So it was right in the middle. And Rodney was hired, I strongly suspect, in part on the strength of his work on Saga, although obviously I was not part of any of those conversations. And I had worked a little on both the previous editions, so
yeah,
we kind of made sense. But as far as the workflow goes, at the time, Rodney and I did not know 4th edition existed, though we both suspected, I suspect. Which means I can finally, with these people, Rodney did not suspect? Okay.
I did not, because I had just, not too long before this, worked on the, I think it was Monster Manual 5. I had a few monsters in for 3rd edition. So, like, not long before, I mean, I didn't know until I came in-house in February of 07 that 4th edition was being worked on. As far as I remember, I was just like, yep, I guess that's still doing some 3rd edition D&D.
Some of my suspicions were coming from what was happening with the D20 Modern line, which I was working on, and projects were getting shorter and projects were getting canceled. And at one point, I was told, hey, this book that you've written a chunk of, we're going to pay you for it, but it's not going to be finished and it's never coming out. And I'm like, well, that sounds like the sort of thing that happens just before this would suddenly not jive with the new edition of D&D. But one thing that I want to finally put to bed once and for all, people keep saying, well, 4th edition, Saga edition was clearly a test bed for ideas that then later put in 4th edition D&D. No. Is there some conceptual overlap? Sure, because Rodney and I wrote a draft. We went to Chris, and Chris, who obviously was aware of 4th edition, had all this stuff coming over from 4th edition. So there was some creative melange there at the end. But in no way was Saga Edition a test bed for anything. What we were all trying to do was make the best D20 Star Wars game we could make. And obviously, when you've got the brilliant designers at Wizards coming up with new ideas to solve old problems, some of those you're going to apply to the thing you're working on. But
yeah, we were working on
here. That was not what was happening.
Yeah, we were working on Star Wars at a much faster pace than 4th edition. So the 4th edition documents that I received, and I was trying to plunder. By the time we got into actually putting the book together, the 4th edition team had gone off in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
So you might see things in the book that feel novel. They may have been in 4th edition originally, but actually never made it into that game.
Yeah, I think from my recollection, and again, it's been unfortunately 20 years, from my recollection, about the only thing that I can point to definitively and say, like, oh, this felt like it came from those early discussions was the skill system. I think, like, or the math behind skills, I think was something, because 3rd edition D&D and D20 Star Wars and D20 Revised all kind of use the same, every skill is a progression all its own, right? And then 4th edition D&D and Star Wars Saga Edition was more about are you proficient or not, and then a mathematical progression upward, right? And so I think that was like one thing that I can recall coming from, like, Chris being like, hey, we've got, we should try and use this math behind it. I didn't put 2 and 2 together, probably should have, but if you're Rodney. But yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like we had a huge amount of freedom to sort of kick around, like, hey, what do we think is the best, best path forward for a Star Wars game, given we know, and we drew on, our own experiences for that.
That's right. And this wasn't our first Star Wars RPG either. We had one previous that Bill Slavicsek spearheaded, and Owen, you wrote for. You did a Starships book, as I recall, for that for that game.
And he's still credited on Saga Edition's credits page, which I always assumed was sort of a legacy credit. Although I'd be happy to hear more if I'm wrong about that.
It's a question. It's really a thing of there's enough of the previous game's DNA or in Saga Edition to justify a credit.
Yeah, without the Star Wars D20 edition and the revised Star Wars edition, Saga would look different, right? So it's not that it was the same game system. It's that it was influenced by those two original game systems pretty strongly. And I also want to mention, because we brought up math, a lot of math for Saga Edition was also checked by our editor, Gary Sarley, who did a ton of looking at, okay, if you are a 12th level soldier and you are being shot at by stormtroopers on average with this math, how often will they hit? What kind of damage will they do? How often will they drop you, etc. So even at the editorial level, there was a lot of experimentation and double checking and coming back on things. But on the skill system, the one thing I remember about it distinctly is that the question of, hey, should someone in Star Wars get good at something we've never seen them do before? And I distinctly remember, it's the only thing about this part I remember, talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi jumping on a giant lizard and riding through mountains with no sign he'd ever ridden a creature before in his life. And I'm like, this is a pulp universe game, right? If you try something, chances are you're good at it. So I was a good deal more uptight 20 years ago about trying to model reality instead of making a game. I was much more on the simulationist end of things.
Yeah.
But simulation just doesn't make sense for Star Wars.
Agreed. Yeah, that's one of, I think, Saga's triumphs, and there's a great many things I can describe as one of Saga's triumphs. I could fill the rest of the hour with that. But its ability to prioritize modeling Star Wars over modeling what somebody might push their glasses up and call real life is absolutely on point, consistently throughout the design.
Well, we did have two editions.
It doesn't work that way. Sorry, Rodney.
Oh no, you're fine. I was just gonna say we did have two D20 Star Wars editions to build off of as well. So like we did have the advantage of iteration, right? Like we knew what had worked the previous time and what didn't. Also, I mean, we drew a lot of inspiration from D20 Modern as well, which Owen worked on, Chris worked on, I worked on source books for it, right? So it was, going back to talking about like, did so and so deserve a credit? Like everything is built on everything else. Everything is built on learnings from the previous thing or or a different game, right? So we had a lot of advantages, I think, when it came to the starting point of the design.
We are standing on the shoulders of giants. That's as true in the RPG world as it is in the science or any other, for that matter.
And if you're talking about Star Wars and Bill Slavicsek, that's a particular
right. Yeah,
right? He wrote the original guide guide to the Star Wars universe. He named things like the Twi'lek species. He had worked on the West End Games version. If you had a Star Wars question, it was often faster to walk to Bill's office than to bring up the officially the Jedi holocron that had the answer to everything, right? That was an actual physical object that Chris had, that if you had a question, you had to ask him, right? Even when I was on staff at Wizards and Chris was running that team, I couldn't access the holocron. I had to ask Chris the question, and we tried to bunch them up so we only bugged him once a week.
This is before the days of like Wikipedia's.
Yeah.
Right. When the holocron was on a CD.
CD.
And they only gave you one copy.
Wow.
And somebody had to be the custodian of that copy, and if it got lost, it would be their neck that was on the line. The holocron is actually an interesting little aside. So it didn't exist until Wizards asked for it. There was no Star Wars holocron, and it's because of our needs for the RPG that we were able to go to Lucas Licensing and say, hey, we think that this resource is essential, not just for us, but for any other partner you work with, and we'll pay for it. Wizards hired Leland Chi, the holocron custodian. I believe Leland's still there.
He is.
Yeah, so it was a case. I've never seen anything like that happen before, which is why I bring it up. But they were. I'm sure Lucas has more than gotten their money's worth out of it. At this point. And no, it's not on CDs anymore.
On the subject of Lucas licensing, obviously they were involved in the project. They'd have had to have been. What did they do other than, accept a check and give you permission?
So they furnished us with anything that we needed as a resource. They were pretty hands-off, except at various key points. Like they had approval of the outline.
Yep.
And then once we started to have what was close to finished text, they reviewed that. And then they reviewed the layout with the text and the imagery, both illustrations and photography, together. They also gave us approved photographic references and told us you could use these. They also said you can't use these. But beyond that, they were pretty light touch. Wizards had worked with them up to this point for over a decade, so I think there was a confidence in us.
The other important thing that they did prior to Saga was take key people that were going to work on books when a movie came out, and frequently, at least a few cases, take them down to Skywalker Ranch, and tell them what the outline was, and possibly show them key scenes and designs prior to the movie coming out.
Yeah, I remember going down there one time and being locked in a closet with the Phantom Menace script, the final shooting script, and having basically an hour to read it. You couldn't take notes. You couldn't bring in a phone or anything of that sort. It was just you and this document that they handed you. And so I came out of that meeting with a bunch of emotions, one of which was, I got to get a pencil and a pad as quickly as
Yeah, I had, so during the development of the Saga Edition core game, Owen and I didn't have really any interaction. That all went through Chris. But then once I came in-house and started working on all the source books, very similar experience. I was, helping shepherd the Star Wars source books at that point, and I would spend a fair amount of time at those critical points working with Leland or Chris Gallagher, who was mostly in charge of like miniatures approvals. But because Leland was also curating the holocron, and because that was still, relatively early days for having a centralized database of lore, certainly from just like a license management standpoint, they had never done anything like that. So I did get to spend a fair amount of time working with Leland to try and figure out, like, okay, we're saying X about, this thing in Star Wars, it's contradicted by these three other things. What's actually true? But usually it was very much a collaborative effort. And like sometimes, we would say like, hey, there's no information on this. What should we say? And he would say like, well, we want to make this claim at this point, right? So, they were very collaborative, very helpful for me, especially because, I was 26 years old at the time, new to the industry full time. And so having, Lucasfilm's support, and they were very supportive, was really critical for me.
Yeah. All of my development experience was with the previous editions of the game when it was on staff, because quite properly, Wizards did development in-house, right? That was one of the reasons you had employees, was to have a continuity of voice and a continuity of experience, and someone that knew things like 4th edition is coming along. But the one thing that I very much appreciated when I was looking at comments, like on the original Starships of the Galaxy, was that there would be little suggestions. Hey, you're mentioning that you want this starship to fill this role in the outline. There's this other starship on this page of this Marvel comic that might fill that role better. And I'm like, oh, well, I haven't read or at least memorized every Marvel comic. And of course, some of those things were, what was a favored item or beloved concept of that reviewer. But if someone that works at Lucasfilm has some beloved niche thing, that is absolutely a good opportunity to pull it out. I also had one of them advise when I was working on Starships of the Galaxy, that in almost every case, even if I had to say, see that 3-pixel blob in this scene in Jedi, that's the starship that I'm doing. And approvals would go, oh, that's already been seen on screen. Okay, we approve it. Even though no one had any idea where it was from or even what it looked like. If I could point at something and say, this blob has never been defined before, so I want to define it, that was much more likely to get approved than saying, I want to create this brand new thing that has never been seen, mentioned, or hinted at.
Okay, excellent. So we talked a little bit about how Saga Edition shares DNA with previous Star Wars RPGs, mechanically, particularly with the D20 versions. Can you think of any examples of twists on those mechanics that you are particularly fond of, or even ideas you had to change those mechanics that didn't make it in?
Oh, that didn't make it in.
Yeah.
Gosh.
There's a couple of really interesting mechanical twists in Saga Edition that I love. I'm thinking here particularly of the condition track, which I wish future iterations of D20 games had kept, because it was such a great piece of design.
I think that was mine.
It was.
Yeah, the condition track was yours, 100%.
Yeah. And I can't tell you where that came from, other than my head. It wasn't in the 4th edition draft.
I mean, I always felt like it evolved from yours and mine and Rodney's conversations, that we wanted wherever possible to simplify this game and speed it up. But
Yes. Yeah, I was really, the only thing I remember is I wanted to be able to basically capture the rule on a single page and just keep it as dirt simple as possible.
I think also at the time we were all very, knee deep in our own 3rd edition D&D campaigns, which had a lot of conditions, and a lot of different conditions that were just like a shade different. Like, well, there's 3 bullet points on this one and 4 on this one. 3 of them are the same, right?
Yeah,
So,
and when you look sort of under the hood mechanically at them, the difference really doesn't justify the existence in many cases.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this Saga Edition condition idea didn't fade away into nothingness. It actually inspired a change to how exhaustion works in the 2025 version of 5th edition.
Oh, I haven't really read the 2025 version. Can you elaborate?
Essentially, the way the exhaustion condition works now is it's a penalty that goes up with each level of exhaustion. So you're -2 on a number of different things. If you got 1 level, then you're -4, -6, -8. So it's, whereas the 2014 exhaustion rule had kind of a bespoke effect for each level, and nobody could remember.
Had to look it up every time.
Yeah.
At level 5, you die. That's pretty much all I could remember.
So that's Saga's contribution to 5th edition.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the condition track is interesting from from the perspective that it consolidated a lot of those very similar conditions together, and kind of swept up a lot of what would previously have been a +2 bonus here, a -2 penalty here, et cetera, under like one umbrella. It did end up becoming long term a challenging piece of mechanics to design around, because it was very easy to fall back on it as like, oh, well, we've got the condition track, we'll just make this an extra condition, positive or negative or whatever, right? And then that could very quickly get out of control as 2 or 3 or 4 different source books come out, and you'd be like, I'll grab this from this one and this from this one and this from this one. And now it's like, well, I shoot Darth Vader with a stun bolt and he's immediately at, -10 unconscious or whatever. So, I recall during the source book phase of the game, like eventually we realized, like, okay, we cannot go to this well too often. We have to be restrained.
Yeah, one of the things that happens with core rulebooks, on lines especially that use freelancers, is anything you put in the core rulebook, a freelancer sees as permission to build on, expand, draw from, and some of that is good freelancing instinct, right? You've read the game, you understand the mechanics, but it also means if you put something in a core rulebook and you're like, okay, we want this to be as far in this direction as we ever go, and it's not super clear that's as far in that direction as you ever want to go, freelancers will naturally go, well, they go to 10, so I will just write a rule where we go to 11, because that's obviously just one more crank up. And I've run into that as a developer at Paizo and as a publisher, and I've done freelance development for Green Ronin. It comes up a lot. Anything that looks like it is a lever or knob, there is a set of freelancers who want to put new notches in those levers and knobs.
Did you see that anywhere else with Saga's mechanics as more expansion books were released? Areas where there started to be creep or bloat?
I mean, as a freelancer, I kept writing new talents.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but at the same time, though, like, new talents have a certain amount of mutual exclusivity to them because you can only take so many, right? So it's kind of like, swapping out card X for Y in your Magic deck or whatever, right? Yes, they could get a little power creepy, but in general, you don't have to worry about them stacking on top of each other quite as badly as, say, a condition track that only had 4 steps in either direction, right? Very quickly could get out of control that way.
Now, I think the main problem with talent bloat was ending up with players feeling like they had to memorize every possibility before they would update their character. You could create option paralysis by having that many options. I still think it was a neat mechanic. I like it. Obviously, I have gone to that well myself many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was something that we brought over from D20 Modern that I thought ended up paying dividends, both as being very player character creation friendly. It did create that pressure, like you said. Totally agree with that. But also just like as a designer, it meant that I could talk to a freelancer and say, hey, I really want a set of talents that are about being the leader of a small commando squad.
Yes.
Right. And describe an experience that the player could have or a feeling that we can instill. And then you break that down into 3 or 4 talents that play into each other. It was really good for that kind of experience-based design and feeling-based design that I thought, ended up paying off in the long run really well.
And it was a great way to expand classes without creating things like archetypes or subclasses or brand new character classes, right? We had our basic roles set in the core rulebook. And then, like Rodney said, if you're like, well, we're doing a book about being commandos, let's do a commando talent tree. And then characters who want to add that to their character, we have a built-in mechanism for or if you want to be a starship pilot, or, I want to be a bounty hunter. Although I think we probably did have a bounty hunter prestige class. But the point is that those were places where you could expand the toolbox that players had to build their character without making them switch to a whole new framework.
Yeah, talents also, they thread a needle, I think, that feats in 3rd edition missed, which is like feats, because they were, other than their prerequisites, broadly available to everyone, right? No regardless of class. Whereas talents at least had you limited by the level of the class that you're leveling up, right? So I'm taking a level of soldier, I can pick from the soldier talents. It narrowed the scope down a little bit, but then each talent tree was very modular. You could take 1 or 2 talents from it. As a designer, a talent tree could have 3 talents in it, or 6 or 4, right? There was not a like you mentioned, subclasses and talent trees are not that far apart, but the difference is a subclass is a whole package that has a semi-rigid structure, whereas a talent tree as long as I think we said the minimum you could have was either 3 or 4 talent, and that was just because we wanted to make sure that you had enough options in that talent tree going upward. But it was the right amount of flexibility without going so wide open that then every source book becomes a free-for-all for players feeling like they can go regardless of class, regardless of whatever, expand their character in that direction.
Yeah.
Also, I always feel like subclasses represent a thematic commitment for the character. You have taken an oath to this. You have devoted a portion of your soul to that. Where talent trees are just you spent 6 months running a commando squad and now you know how to do it well.
I mean, you're right to a certain extent, but of course, there are subclasses that sure just sound like you took 6 months at the Adventurer Annex and picked up a new ability. And that means that there is a potential conceptual disconnect between feeling like some of the Warlock subclasses where these rules are engraved in 6-foot letters on my soul. And some of the fighters is like, hey, I'm really good with a long sword. And those don't necessarily feel narratively like they're in the same space. And as Rodney said, with talent trees, if something felt like it narratively only needed a few extra options, you give it a few extra options. Whereas if you were saying, hey, here is a whole new way to use the Force because you've been trained by the Witches of Dathomir, then we can put however much. And beautifully, if then a new novel comes out that adds a whole new slew of things to the Witches of Dathomir, you can just say, we have added new talents.
That was nice. I think the thing about subclasses, because this is a really great illustration of where D&D and Star Wars might be built on the same underpinning structures of in at least the D20 games, but I would not I'm not in a position to design any D&D right now, but if I was, I probably wouldn't pick talent trees for that, because I want out of D&D classes, I want things to feel very archetypal and very I can point to this and say okay, this is an oath of whatever paladin, and that means a distinct thing. Where Star Wars, there's a little more ambiguity. There's a little more. There's a little bit. The archetypes are at the class level, and then when you step down a little bit, it's just different shades of that class. I like subclasses more. Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
The classes that are there have to gobble up more space.
Yeah, I think you totally could do a fantasy D20 game using a few core classes and talents. But even if it was 100% compatible with the spells and monsters from 5.5, it would feel different. And it would feel different at a very basic level. And it might well be that if you were doing a licensed property, off the top of my head, if you're doing Black Company, it should feel different from D&D. While D&D sort of started life as hey, we want to be able to say fireball while playing a war game, it has taken on its own conceptual narrative space. There are things that are D&D games, and there are things that feel D&D like in 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, because those designers have been looking at it and saying, what do we want a D&D game to say about your characters?
On kind of a related topic, one of Saga's triumphs, if I can say it again, is that with 5 core classes and then a number of prestige classes and different talent trees, the game lets a Jedi stand at the line next to a guy who's good with a blaster, next to someone who's quick-witted and talks well, and everybody gets to feel awesome. How did you make that work?
Very carefully.
Yeah, I think there was some, I don't know if it was a big criticism, but it certainly bubbled up that with the D20 version of Star Wars, Jedi felt overpowered. If you had one in the group, they kind of made the other characters feel a bit small. So it was certainly on my mind, even though I didn't have a perfect solution for it yet, that I wanted to address that concern simply by making any class option you chose not a regret. But too much time has passed that I don't remember all the conversations that followed.
And there's a certain amount of my favorite character concept itis amongst players of any Star Wars, right? When we did the original Star Wars D20, a lot of people thought, well, a first level Jedi isn't Jedi-like. And I'm like, well, a first level Jedi is Luke facing a drone in the Millennium Falcon, right? He is not Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is not Mace Windu. He's first level. And if he's hanging out with a fifth level scoundrel, then he's not going to look as tough. So some of it is just accepting that, hey, if you've got a Mandalorian and a Sabak player and an ace pilot, each of them may be more awesome in a different place, in a different way, but they've all got their space. And if they are all equally experienced within their track, that is a place where, you know, you can say, hey, Darth Vader can throw a lightsaber at people because he's 19th level. That's not something you get to expect to do when you're third. And now someone's going to level check me on what level you can take through a lightsaber. But
I think this is a good example too, where the decisions made around like the core math of the game and the condition track really worked in our favor, because by distilling so many things that had previously been very eclectic down into something a little bit more unified with Saga Edition, it made it easier from the design standpoint to say, like, yeah, okay, a scoundrel and a Jedi of the same level are going to have the same attack bonus, and they're going to have the chance to do similar things, and then it's just a matter of balancing the things that they can do. But it's much less difficult than I think it would have been in previous more, like I say, more eccentric or more eclectic mechanical systems, where those two classes don't have to obey the same core math progression, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it specifically works great for a pulp kind of setting. As a home game, my longest, most successful 1930s pulp game was just Saga Edition Star Wars with no Jedi. Right. And I'm not even seeing no force powers, because if someone wanted to get the minor force powers and they end up, playing a mentalist or whatever, that's fine. But all I had to do was say that blasters are back to the pistols that the models were originally made on, and the rules for starships are airships and biplanes, and everything worked great.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And that reminds me of what I think is the triumph of Star Wars, which is something I laid directly at Rodney's feet for the Saga Edition. And now Rodney's looking for the Saga Edition Starships of the Galaxy. Rodney created the idea of these zones of effect of heavy starships, so that one of the things a starship could do, instead of shoot at 57 different people, was, okay, anyone that gets within this many squares of this starship suffers an attack, or anyone that gets within this many squares has this degradation to its sensors, whatever. And I used that system a lot in my pulp game for airships and dirigibles and biplanes. And it was so much, this coming from the guy who didn't think of it for the first Starships of the Galaxy book, right? I was straight, this is how many super turbo double blasters this ship has, and that just means if you need to make 47 attack rolls, make 47 attack rolls. But that system meant that you could put these giant starships, airships, whatever, on the map and help control the map, and they were relevant and they were important and they were terrifying. But much like the condition track, they don't take 8 million minutes to run it. It's creating up a zone effect. This is what it's doing. It's a mobile piece of dangerous terrain in space with die rolls associated. I've always thought that was a brilliant piece of design, which I want to make sure gets highlighted, because I think more people who vehicles is famously one of the things that a lot of role-playing games don't do well. Role-playing games often focus on here's 6 people standing around a 10-foot wide corridor, whether they're shooting or talking or looking around, that's the scale they're at. And I think Saga Edition, its starship system, is one of the cleanest vehicle systems I've ever interacted with as a designer or a GM or a player for that matter.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm just going to agree wholeheartedly with Owen's assessment. When I see a new game and it's got vehicle rules in it, I usually don't look at them because I'm afraid they're going to just tank my whole appreciation of the game. And I get it, it's hard to do. And often the trap people fall into is they kind of turn it into its own game. So it becomes this game within a game that feels completely divorced from the RPG. And you feel it at the table a lot of times. It's like, oh, we're entering the Starship game now. We'll put all of our role-playing stuff aside, and now we're just going to move ships around on a table. Here, I thought we were pretty successful in integrating the character level stuff with the ship level stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, the thing that Owen said a few minutes ago about it's 32 turbo lasers, so I got to make 32 attack rolls. Reminds me of something I was going to bring up earlier when you asked, what didn't make it in that you wish had made it in. When I look back at Saga Edition, I think one of the biggest regrets that I have, and I say regret, like I wouldn't have made a different decision at the time because that's where I was as a designer and where my head was at, right? But I think one of the biggest things I wish we had done was I wish we had spent more time and effort in Saga Edition on making the game easier to run as a game master, because I think one of the things that is often overlooked, especially when you're talking about like a licensed game where you're trying to fit the game to that IP, like if the game is hard to run or difficult mechanically to run as a game master, that anchor player of the group is going to have less fun, or is going to struggle, or it has more potential off ramps than otherwise would. I really wish we had lavished more attention on the game mastering side of the game the way we did with the player side of the game, because I think the player side of the game shows a lot of attention to, like, hey, what would make this better to play as a player? I wish we'd been able to spend that same amount of effort on the game mastering side of things. I remember there was an argument we had, argument air quotes, we had when we were working on the core book that I'd been working on Monster Manual 5. Dave Noonan was the internal designer running that. And we had been having a lot of conversations about, like, hey, do monsters even need to follow the same rules as players? Because that was the same thing that D&D 3rd did, was D&D 3rd monsters had to follow the same rules as players, right? And I brought that up in some discussion we were having via email, and I was like, hey, do stormtroopers need to follow the same rules as Han Solo? Like, can we just do whatever the stats need to be? I remember we had a discussion about it, and ultimately we decided to build NPCs the way we build characters, which is the way things have been done in 3rd edition. And I think that's one thing that when I look at the game, I wish we had done differently, because as a designer on all the source books, is a huge pain in the ass trying to make a bunch of stat blocks that followed all the rules. But just from the at the table, moment to moment perspective of a game master, like, it's more complicated. And I think I think that's an area where we could have made it easier to run as a game master, and the game would have had more longevity than it even did.
So I was on the opposite side of that question when Rodney was asking if we could just have simplified bad guy rules. I was, at the time, 20 years ago, I believe I mentioned more uptight, and I very, very strongly felt that the universe required that stormtroopers make exactly the same kind of census player characters. And if anyone has looked at Starfinder, you will see that if you go to the monster section in Starfinder, there are 3 kinds of monsters, and if they're at a set CR, they have a base set of numbers that you can look up on the fly. And yes, you can throw in some modifiers, but I was wrong 20 years ago. And we should have done it Rodney's way. I should have been on his side, and I at least learned from that mistake. And so, when we were doing Starfinder at Paizo, I was on staff at the time, and they were like, hey, Owen, you have worked on Pathfinder and D&D and Star Wars. does Starfinder interest you? And I'm like, yes, very, very, very much, in case that's not obvious. And I was able to take a lot of lessons from Saga Edition, including places where I had pressed the wrong call to make a better game. Not the Starships part, but I was not involved in the Starship rules for Starfinder because you have to divide these things up, right? One person can't write everything. That's the whole reason you've got 3 people on the show. But I think Rodney's absolutely right that there are too many jumping off points if it's too complicated for a GM. And the first jumping off point is no one volunteering to GM, right? If you have a group of 4 or 5 friends and they get together and they pull out a game and they're excited to play it and no one's willing to be a GM, you just lost a bunch of sales on that first barrier.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff in the creature stat blocks that players will never interact with. It took me a while to learn that lesson too. 5th edition changed, did an about face on that. The monsters are not built the way the characters are. There's some commonalities, but
sure,
you look under the hood and completely different engine.
And Chris, to talk about D&D for a second, like 4th edition also built the character or their monsters different from characters. But I think one of the things that we did in 5th edition D&D was we looked at like, hey, sometimes a monster does just need to cast Fireball, right? Yeah. Not everything has to be 100% divorced, but the right things need to be different.
Right. Yeah. But it was all from the lens of, can we just make the GM's job easier, please?
Yes.
Yeah. The culmination, the climax of the campaign that I ran in Saga Edition was a 3-way confrontation between our players, Emperor Palpatine, and the renegade Darth Vader and his breakaway faction of the Empire. And I remember as I was prepping for that game, I was looking at the official rules. Oh, here are the stats for Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader, and thinking to myself, there is no way on God's earth I'm going to be able to remember this and make it functional at the table. So I just sat down and rewrote like a crib cheat sheet version of Palpatine and one of Vader that was probably much closer to what they evolved into in later games like Starfinder.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and honestly, when you are doing a licensed property as popular as Star Wars, people playing at the table is not your only market, right? Some of that stuff you are writing for Star Wars fans. And some of that stuff you are writing, at least at the time, for distributor buyers. And then to crack open the book, say, oh, there's a bunch of stuff about Darth Vader in here. That'll be popular. I'll order 100 copies. And the 3-tier system that existed then has largely not just broken, but fallen into horrific bankruptcy arguments. But so when we were working on the D20 games before Saga Edition, there were meetings about, is this book's title sexy enough, which had nothing to do with, is the content going to be good to play? It's, is this going to get people who only care about Star Wars and don't care about role-playing games to pick this game up? And that was a huge push from the marketing department at the time. I wasn't in the company anymore, but when Saga Edition rolled around, that seemed much less of a pressure.
Yeah, I don't remember it being a pressure at all.
Yeah, you weren't around for Han Solo's Starship Secrets meeting, I don't think, Chris.
I don't recall sitting on that meeting.
That's a sexy title.
So Starships of the Galaxy, that was at one point decided by a official Wizards of the Coast committee that they were going to call it Han Solo's Starship Secrets. That's what they wanted to call it. And the only reason they didn't is that it was, and according to the nice little note I got from Lucasfilm, the first time in Lucasfilm licensing history that they had to reject a title of a project. And they said, we see that the writer wrote Starships of the Galaxy on the outline, use that title. And I was just so happy because I didn't want to write Han Solo's Starship Secrets. I had written a little forward by Han Solo saying, hey, welcome to Han Solo's Starship Secrets. I have nothing to do with this except this forward because Lando told me he'd give me 10,000 credits if I was part of this project. But you got to look at what is your end audience, and that is not always purely a design decision.
I've got 8 Saga Edition books here on the table next to me, and I'm rating their titles by sexiness. Scavenger's Guide to Droids is up near the top.
That was one when we were working on it internally. We were experimenting with new ways to present the information inside in a way that was more compelling than just here's a bunch of stat blocks, right?
Like
we'd done Threats of the Galaxy, which was like the monster manual, and it was just like here's a bunch of stat blocks. And it's like, okay, you know, we're going to give you a bunch of droids. How many droids do you actually need to use in a given session or a given adventure? Not that many, but maybe we can, you know, write this in such a way that there's more useful information in here than just the stat blocks. And so that actually came from the inside out, where it was like, okay, well, we've written all of these different sidebars and you know, flavor text chunks that are meant to inspire you to do things with droids other than just like they're enemies that you shoot. Who cares, right? And so they're like, I don't know, let's call it the Scavenger's Guide to Droids, not the Droid Manual.
The design of Scavenger's Guide to Droids reminded me in a very good way of old 1st and 2nd edition Shadowrun books, where the game material was always broken up by in-universe commentary from Shadowrunners critiquing or offering advice about the different things that the book was about. Scavenger's Guide to Droids struck me as similar. I really like it.
The West End Games Star Wars books did that a little bit too. They would have the characters that interjected things periodically.
I want to ask Chris a question that I've been wanting to ask and never had a chance to in 20 years. Hey, Chris, why was the size of the books changed? The Saga Edition books are not the 8.5, 11 of every other RPG.
The squares are cool, man.
Yeah, but was that really it? Well, I mean, I know that you were involved in that decision. What was that?
So 2 things. One, since there were 2 different D20 versions of the game out there, and the business did want it to look different on the shelves so that it would not be confused with other books. And we know how game stores work. They keep everything, right? They never throw anything out. So if you happen to see this next to the other Star Wars book, you wouldn't mistake it as a supplement to that previous edition. It would feel more like a standalone game. So that was one reason. The other reason was, and this came from me, is I figured that these books would likely sit behind a GM screen, and if they're shallower, they fit better behind the screen if they're not as tall.
Yep.
Okay. I had always suspected that market presentation was part of the reason. But like I have heard theories that you wanted them to go in big box stores on some of the shelves with the art books or the sci-fi books rather than the RPGs, and that just seemed way piddly. So I wanted, since you were here and we're talking about it, I wanted to ask.
Yeah, it was a pain in the ass though, from a production point of view. I'm sure they would have preferred it being just the same size books.
I remember because the core book came out in 2007, which was the 30th anniversary of A New Hope. And I remember there being some discussions with Lucasfilm that they really wanted this book to feel special and feel like it was a celebration of that 30th anniversary. That's why, like, you had that very simplistic gold cover, Darth Vader. Yeah, absolutely right. Like just you know, it's a celebration of this 30th anniversary of A New Hope. 30 years of Star Wars, you know, they wanted it to be something unique, and I can't blame them that at all. I think at the time also there was, and you know, Chris probably could confirm or deny this, but there was a desire within CAPS, which is like our art direction and production team, to explore new things and push the envelope in regards to form factors. And you know, this was a thing that they did for years after Saga Edition as well, but just trying to find new ways to make games pop, right? And
yeah, Paul Hebron, who is the art director, didn't come from a D&D or Star Wars background, so he really sort of brought a fresh experimental perspective to everything.
Yeah,
there were no sacred cows to him.
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe we're winding down. I knew this was going to go fast, but this went really fast.
Super.
Can I ask one more question before we wrap it up? I've got another page I haven't even looked at yet.
Well, we can save some for part 2.
So Saga Edition had 3 really good years, and then it ended, I think, when the license moved away from Wizards. Was there anything in the pipeline that didn't make it in time? Anything interesting that fell to the axe because the license ran out?
Yeah. The Death Star book.
Well, that was
Or
that was the revised edition.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right. You're
So
right.
that was because you and I worked on that book together.
Right. We wrote that book. We got paid for it. It
Battle
was finished and never came out. But at one point, you were talking about doing an updated version of it.
I ended up going into those files and pulling out a huge chunk of that text, and that went into Galaxy at War, which was the soldier theme source book. So that there's a whole chapter on battle stations there that is the text that you and I wrote for Ultimate Battle Stations that was pulled forward for that. From my perspective, when it comes to Saga Edition, I think we had enough advance warning that the license was not going to be renewed, that the last year of releases, really, we were able to plan out from the beginning. And I can honestly say, I got to do everything I wanted to do at the time. So there was nothing on the cutting room floor that had been written or designed anyways.
Yeah, I had sort of hoped early in the conception of the line that we would do some kind of Star Wars super adventure.
Yeah.
Simply because it would have been enormously helpful to GMs just to have a pre-canned one. But depending on when you were at Wizards and who was calling the shots, adventures were either loved or people didn't want to touch them with a 10-foot lightsaber.
I mean, there was Dawn of Defiance.
Yeah.
That was all on the web.
Right.
And it was free, and getting the resources to produce that was...
Because what we failed to understand at the time, and what continues to vex a lot of people at the company, is adventures are essential to the ecosystem of the line. They demonstrate how all the different parts of the game come together and work together to create a fun experience at the table.
Yep.
So even if this product is aimed squarely at GMs and therefore will sell less than a book of game mechanics, it is vital to the health of the line.
I agree.
Yep. I mean, when I was hired, I was told that the whole point of the OGL was to get other companies to make adventures for D&D so that they could put it into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And of course,
it's easy to do on a Star Wars licensed line.
Right. You can't do it on a Star Wars license, but also the other problem is that if you have other companies in charge of all your adventures, they will write the adventures they think are good for your ecosystem rather than the adventures you think are good for your ecosystem, which I'm obviously a huge proponent of the OGL, but I think it's safe to say it has gone in directions Wizards did not predict or particularly want.
And I think when it comes to adventures being an important part of the ecosystem, one of the things that I always I play a ton of new games that come out, and one of the things I always look at is what is the iconic experience that you're trying to communicate with your game, and Adventures do a great job of fulfilling the second half of that, because the core book and all the player materials, here's what we're going to give you to do with it, but I want to know how is this supposed to play out, right? And it may not be the way that it may not be that I don't want to say this, when you give me an adventure that's the iconic adventure for your game, you as the designers are saying to me, the player, this is the experience that I wanted you to have when I designed this, right? And I really value that in games these days, where I think maybe in the past I didn't as much.
But also, it may not be as uncommon in reviews as it is now, but certainly when Saga Edition came out, one of the things that professional RPG reviewers, which maybe there just aren't so many of them anymore, would often say is, hey, this is a really neat setting, and these are really neat rules. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with it. Okay, you're playing cybernetic minotaurs in the endless maze city. That all sounds cool. What do they do day to day? What's an adventure look like? How often are they supposed to run into an encounter? If half my players are dead halfway through session 1, is that expected, or have I done something wrong? Or
well, let me just ask briefly, Owen, what can people purchase to put money in your pocket right now?
Right now, to put money in my pocket, your best bet is to go to my Patreon.
Okay,
I have a
cool.
Patreon. I put up material every week. A lot of it is still first edition Pathfinder and Starfinder, because I have been working with the D20 engine since the late 1990s before it came out, and I'm just not willing to give it up yet, which I suspect you will pry the D20 system from my cold, dead hands.
Rodney, what can people purchase to put money in your pocket?
I'm about to open up the pre-orders for Neon City Outlaws, my cyberpunk RPG. I just need to get the pledge manager finished. So by the time this comes out, probably you'll be able to pre-order Neon City Outlaws.
Woohoo! And Chris, same question. What would you like people to purchase of yours?
So I hope that folks check out the Hope and Fear expansion to Daggerheart. It is beautiful, stunning piece of work, and a great addition to the Daggerheart line.
Yeah, for Chris, folks, buy anything from Darrington Press and tell them Chris sent you, and they'll know he's responsible for the sale.
Yeah,
That's how it works.
and catch me at a convention near you, because I'm going to quite a few of them this year.
All right. Well, this was absolutely amazing. Since Chris offered, I will come back in 6 months and say, hey, let's do this again. This went really well. Brent still has more questions. Brent, save those
Let's
questions.
throw those questions away.
Barely started page 2.
So thank you all so much for being on. This was a real delight.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Hang with you all. Thank you for setting this up.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Brent. And Chris, Rodney, really nice to see y'all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likewise.
This is not germane to anything we've talked about recently, but before we all go our separate ways, Chris, I thought you might like to know that there is a small cadre of nerds in northeastern Wisconsin who now, 30 years later, still use kobolds. They're more of a nuisance than a real problem. As an in-joke for the bandits of Bunglewood, that
Issue
they got
54.
absolutely shredded by
Yeah.
1997.
Yeah. I've been on the planet too long.
Hey, at least we avoided having me or Rodney talk about how we were reading your material growing up.